with something and somebody completely different, coming from a completely different, more scientific background, Dr. Gijs Huisman. It's a Dutch guy. When we did some research for this event, we came across his work, which deals with haptic technology. There's the word again, technology, but also haptic. What does it mean to be haptic when something is haptic? A handshake is haptic. A tap on the back is haptic. And Gijs Huisman has done research into the impact of this kind of haptic behavior, and it seems to be really, really big. And what's interesting is that he is trying to connect people using technology and bringing them back to haptic environments, haptic behavior. Please welcome to the stage, Gijs Huisman.
Thank you, Robert. This is quite a walk. Good morning, everyone. Hi. I'm Gijs Huisman, as Robert said, a very Dutch name. And I'm here today representing two affiliations, actually. First, I am a co-founder and the director of research and innovation at House of Haptics, a startup company. And we create wearable haptic products that allow people to communicate through touch over distance. So I'll be showing you some of the products that we have. I'm also a senior researcher at the Digital Society School here in Amsterdam. And at the DSS, I direct research in which we investigate the ways that are... I think I should... Thank you. Okay, this works fine. In which we investigate ways in which our physical world and our digital world, the digital devices that we use in this world, become increasingly merged. And we do so from a sustainability perspective, right? So we work towards the Sustainable Development Goals set up by the United Nations. So I'll be drawing on both these affiliations and the work I do for both in this talk. Now, there are three things in general that I would like to get across today. First, I want to talk a little bit about the sense of touch and what it is actually and how the neurophysiology of touch informs our perception of things that we feel. I think it's really interesting and also from a design perspective creates challenges of how we should think about designing for the sense of touch. I also want to talk a little bit about haptic technology and kind of some technological innovations that you see of new interactive technologies that enable us to address the sense of touch in new and interesting and frankly quite exciting ways. And I want to kind of reflect on how I think that these kinds of technologies might change our concept of what space is. Now, I want to begin by having you consider this couch or sofa. Now, there's nothing particularly special about this couch, but I do want to draw your attention to the physical nature of this object. Right, so a person designing or creating this couch probably at some point picked up a piece of wood to feel the grain of the wood, its shape, its weight, and its strength. The same person probably selected different types of leather, stroked their hand over it to feel the suppleness of the material and the sturdiness of it. And the same for the filling of the cushions, right? This person probably tried to find something that is not too soft and not too hard, that provides support when you sit down on it. Now, when this couch ends up in a store, a person interested in buying this couch would probably stroke their hand over this leather, maybe sit down on it and feel the support of these pillows. And when this couch eventually ends up in someone's living room, again, this person might sit down on it to feel the comfortable position that they're in when they sit down on this couch, or maybe even lie down. Now, what I'm getting at here is that the way that we interact with these physical objects, in this case a couch, is through our sense of touch. And this is a function of the sense of touch that's typically called discriminative touch. It's the way that we use our sense of touch to get information from the external world. So it's really about perceiving the world that is outside of our bodies. And of course, the skin is a really important organ when we think about the sense of touch. It's not the only organ because there are also receptors found in our joints and in our muscles. But the skin is quite remarkable in the sense that we have about 3.6 kilograms of it. It covers about 1.7 square meters. And it's, of course, very important to protect our bodies from physical harm, but it also keeps out all kinds of microbes and chemical threats to the body. And it's also quite handy of keeping our internal organs inside our body. So very important in that sense. But the sense of touch is also special in the sense that it is the only distributed sense organ that we have. Right? Our eyes, our nose, our ears, and our tongue are all localized, but the sense of touch, our skin, covers our entire body. And this creates all kinds of challenges when we start thinking about how we should design for and address the sense of touch. Now, the sense of touch is actually, it's more accurate actually to speak of multiple senses of touch. What you see here are examples of cutaneous receptors, so receptors that you find in the skin. There are three classes of them, you might say. So there are thermoreceptors, which allow us to feel temperatures and temperature changes. And there's actually specialized receptors for different types of temperature ranges. We have nociceptors, which signal pain. And we can recognize this in the sense of sharp pains that we might feel when we stub our toe, but also these kind of longer throbbing pains when we have a headache, for example. And there are different types of nociceptors that signal us about these kinds of things. And then finally, there's a class of receptor called a mechanoreceptor. And these have to do with physical deformations of the skin. And that's actually what you're seeing here in this image, a cross-section of the skin and different types of mechanoreceptors in there. And these are, again, quite specialized. So we have certain receptors that signal vibrations, for example. So when you stroke your hand over the surface of a table, for example, a specific type of receptor will give you feedback about the kind of texture of the surface. And when you reach the edge of the table, there will be another receptor that gives you information about the shape and the angle of this edge. So really, the sense of touch is quite multimodal. Now, to make things a little bit more complicated, the sense of touch is distributed, as I said, but it's not equally sensitive all over the body. Now, what you're seeing here in this image is a visualization of something called the two-point discrimination threshold. Now, if you would put your two fingers less than 4 centimeters apart and gently poke the person sitting in front of you in the back, you can try this out if you feel like it, it should feel to this person as if it's only one point of contact on their back. Now, if you move your fingers further than 4 centimeters apart, this person should be more easily able to distinguish these 2 points of contact. I can see some people trying it, that's good. Don't be too shy. And of course, when you try the same exercise on your own fingertip, right, keep your fingers, for example, at 1 centimeter apart, it should be very easy to feel the difference between these 2 points of contact. Now, what this means is that the density of receptors and the receptive fields that allow us to perceive touch are not equally distributed all over the body. So our back is much less sensitive in detecting these kinds of differences than our fingertips. Now, as I said, the sense of touch is multimodal. So when we think of doing something like pottery, right, we can kind of feel the vibrations as this material moves around, the clay moves around on this disc. We can feel the pliability of the material, and we can kind of feel the wetness and moisture of the clay. Now, we don't have a moisture receptor in our skin. So this sensation of moisture is actually a combination of sensations from all of these different receptors. So really what we experience as touch is a combination of all kinds of different signals. Now, so far we've mainly been talking about something called passive haptics. So when you pick up your smartphone, you can feel its weight, its shape, its size, you can feel the edges. So this is a way that a physical object tells us something about itself, right? And this is something that we can perceive through the sense of touch. Now, a smartphone can also provide active haptic feedback in the sense that it can vibrate. And through software, we can control the strength of these vibrations, and we might also be able to control certain patterns of these vibrations. So this is an example of how this kind of technology, apart from providing passive haptic feedback, can also provide active dynamic feedback. And there are all kinds of technologies that allow you to do this. So here you see some examples on the top. They are the typical vibration motors that you find in the old pagers, if anyone remembers those, and also in smartphones. Of course, in smartphones, we have slightly more sophisticated actuators that create more accurate vibrations. And here on the bottom, you have something that's quite interesting. It's a device created by a company called Haptics, and they use ultrasound to create vibrations in mid-air. So you can put your arm or your hand out and feel these vibrations in mid-air. If you flip your hand around, though, it doesn't work anymore because it requires this kind of density of receptors that we have in our hands. Now, there are also companies working on really multimodal approaches to haptics. So here you see an example of quite an elaborate piece of technology designed by Haptics. And it's a glove that allows you to feel textures. It can provide force feedback, and it can also make you feel different types of temperatures. Now, the way that they propose to use this is in virtual reality. So you can see you're wearing this kind of VR headset. And when you see a virtual object in virtual reality through this glove, you will also be able to reach out and touch this object. And as you can see here in this image of the woman wearing this headset, you can also see the quite large box and cable there. So you do require quite a lot of control hardware to make this happen. But it's an interesting approach thinking about the fact that the sense of touch is multimodal. Now, here's a project that I'm personally really excited about, also because I helped write the proposal. But it's research currently being conducted at the University of Twente here in the Netherlands and the University of Linköping in Sweden, among others. And what we try to do in this project is create textile haptics. So we are creating electroactive polymer yarns. Yes. So what this means, actually, it's a type of fiber that can contract when you run a current through it. Now, when you knit or weave these fibers together in a structure, you can create actuators that can actually make you feel this kind of movement as a squeezing sensation, for example, or it can be used to create like a stroking motion over the skin. I can imagine if you would knit a sweater of this material, you would have a really rich device to communicate with a person through the sense of touch. Maybe you can also imagine that if you cover a chair or a couch in this material, you could have shape-changing furniture, or you could have furniture that provides you feedback through your sense of touch. So these are, I think, some really interesting technological developments that we'll be seeing in the next few years. Some areas that we're already seeing quite a lot of haptics happening is in the automotive industry. A lot of work is being done on replacing physical buttons with haptic feedback. I'm not too sure how I feel about that. And we also see applications in mobile communication, right? We have our smartphones that vibrate. And of course, virtual and augmented reality, we've seen the Haptics installation, is really an area where there's really a big push for not only making you be able to see virtual objects, but also touch them. I want to go back to this couch for another second. And instead of thinking about it as a physical object, I would like to invite you to also think about it as a social space. Right, different from, say, a chair or a bar stool, a couch is really designed for to be used by multiple people. Right, you might sit on this with more than one person. And what this creates is actually quite a good area for something else to happen with the sense of touch. And that is something called, that is something called social touch. Different from what you might see here on this image, social touch does not exclusively have to do with romantic engagements. I think Robert already gave some good examples, right, of how we use our sense of touch, for example, during a greeting, when we shake hands. We might wish someone good luck by giving them a pat on the back. We might comfort a friend who's having a bad day by hugging them. And in a sports team, we give each other high fives when we've scored a goal. So there are all kinds of ways in which we use our sense of touch, not so much to get information out of the external world, not so much information about objects and things, but really to communicate with other people. And the way I like to think about it is like this. A hug does not just feel nice, it is actually something that's fundamental to us human beings. And maybe this makes intuitive sense, but I would like to take a few minutes to kind of convince you of this statement. I want to begin with this man, Harry Harlow. He was a psychologist, and he worked mainly in the 1940s and 50s. And he was really interested in animal behavior and animal learning. He was actually one of the first persons to recognize that animals have rich emotional lives, for example. Now, what he needed to be able to do his research is subjects. So he had a colony of rhesus macaques in his laboratory. So this is a type of monkey. And what he would do is when a new baby monkey would be born, he would take away this baby monkey from its mother, put it in a separate cage where the only company this monkey had was a terry cloth blanket. So you can imagine this space filled with cages with individual monkeys, each with this piece of blanket. Now, what Harlow observed when staff members of the lab came into these areas to clean these cages, these staff members would try to take away this terry cloth blanket. And what Harlow saw is that these baby monkeys clung onto this piece of blanket for dear life. This is something that really fascinated Harlow, so he set up an experiment to see what this type of behavior was all about. And what he did was it looks like this. So he created two surrogate mothers. And one surrogate mother would provide food, so something that's really crucial for the survival of this monkey, but it was made of a nasty metal wire mesh that was not very nice to touch. And then the other mother was made of a soft fabric. And as you can already see here from these images, and also what Harlow observed, is that these baby monkeys spent the vast majority of their time hanging on to this soft mother. Even when they were trying to feed, they were very reluctant to let go of this infant, of this surrogate mother. And this is a movie clip that kind of demonstrates the types of experiments they were doing. I would like to leave the ethical discussions for what they are. There are obviously some questionable practices here, but I think it's interesting to show.
All of these things are designed to frighten a monkey. Now here we have a peaceful, resting baby monkey. Let's find out what his reactions to his mother are when we frighten him. He's scared, all right. And he does what any child will do in a similar situation.
He runs away.
It's more than running away. He was running to his mother, to touch her, to drive away his fear.
To touch her, to drive away his fear, is what Harlow says here. So the point he was trying to make with this research is that, like a biological need for food, these infant monkeys also had a biological need for physical contact, for touch, something that Harlow called contact comfort. Now, I doubt many people recognize what this is an image of, but it's the hind leg of a cat. I know I'm not doing too well on the animal welfare front up to this point. But what these researchers did is they took the hind leg of a cat and they stripped a piece of the fur and skin, and they inserted electrodes into the nerve fibers of this cat. And what they were trying to do is take electrical measurements from these types of receptors, mechanoreceptors, as we've just seen, that you find in the skin. So they would be poking the skin, prodding it, squeezing it, and they would see these nice electrical signals that would tell them this is this specific receptor that we're now stimulating. Now, at one point during this research, they discovered a type of receptor that did not really respond to these kinds of poking and squeezing touches, but that only responded to slow stroking touches over the skin of these cats. Now, when you think of cats, this is not really surprising. These are actually my cats. I do like animals quite a lot. And what you can see, which is really common behavior for cats, is social grooming, right? So they engage in these kind of stroking touches that they apply with their tongue, not so much for hygienic purposes, but really for a way to bond. And my cats are still in the process of getting to know each other. So that's what you're seeing here. Now, research that follow up on this also showed that this same type of receptor is found in our closest, or one of our closest living relatives, the chimpanzee. And again, you can see here this type of social grooming behavior by chimpanzees, where they kind of stroke the skin and pluck these kind of fleas from each other's fur. Now, we know from research that chimpanzees do this, again, not so much for hygiene, but actually of a way to conduct politics and to show social allegiances with other chimpanzees. So they use these kind of stroking social touches as a way to communicate. And quite recent research has also demonstrated that these same types of receptors, maybe not surprising, are also found in the human skin. And they're called CT afferents, and the current hypothesis is that these receptors signal social touch. Right, so they're kind of a way for us to select among all the kinds of touch sensations that we feel, touches that have specific social relevance. So in a way, we are built for social touch. It's not just something that we do intuitively. Our physiology is constructed in such a way that we can really experience social touch separately from what I call discriminative touch, right? This way of getting information through our sense of touch. Now, final point I want to make, and I think this was also for me a moment when it really clicked together, is thinking about homeostasis. Now, homeostasis is the kind of physiological optimum that we need to keep our bodies in order to survive. right? So when we're hungry, we need to eat. When we're warm, we need to cool down. And when we're too cold, we need to warm up again. Now think of a human infant being born into this world, right? When a human baby is born, it is completely helpless, right? It cannot get up, walk to the fridge, and get something to eat. It cannot put on a sweater. It is really fully dependent on the caregiver for the maintenance of its homeostasis, for keeping its body within these optimums. And the only way it can do that is by communicating to the parent. Now, and everything the parent does in order to feed a child, comfort a child, and warm a child involves touch, social touch. Right? Breastfeeding, I think, is a really good example where you see lots of skin-to-skin contact, and this kind of breastfeeding is necessary for children to grow up healthy. So really, without social touch, actually none of us would be here today, right? So again, a hug does not just feel nice, it is really fundamental to us human beings. Now, and this notion was really a very important point of inspiration for us at House of Haptics, and with our product line, Hey. And what we're interested in is not so much using haptic technology for discriminative touch, or providing feedback about email notifications, for example, but we're really interested in using haptic technology to allow people to communicate through their sense of touch. Right, in the current world that we live in, we're not always in the same room. We're not always able to hug the people that we care about when they're having a bad day. So we're trying to design technology that allows people to kind of engage in these social touch interactions through the internet. And we're currently doing that with two products. One that's actually still in development, the Hey Touch, and the other is the Hey Bracelet, a product that you will be able to try out later here today if you're interested. Now, Hey Bracelet is this wearable bracelet that, when you touch your bracelet, sends a touch to one other connected person. So it's really meant for this kind of one-to-one connection. And different from other types of devices, it doesn't vibrate, but it creates a squeezing sensation on the wrist. So when I squeeze my bracelet, in this case my partner, will feel a gentle squeezing sensation. And it's just a way of saying, I'm thinking about you, I love you, or please come home for dinner quick. So it's really about creating this language around touch that you and you alone, the two of you, know the meaning of. And as I said, it's an exclusive one-to-one connection, so Hey Bracelet will not activate when there is a WhatsApp notification. It will not let you know about email appointments whatsoever. It's really about this unique channel, that's always available channel between you and one other person that you care about, be it your partner, maybe a child, or a family member. So it's about establishing this intimate one-to-one connection. And of course, we're doing it through the app, the Hey app, where we're really careful about the way that we integrate this kind of technology in the lives of people. So I really want to keep it open for everyone to give meaning to these kinds of interactions as they see fit. Now, second product that we're currently developing is Hey Touch. You will be able to see some models that we created here as well later today. Now with Hey Touch, we kind of took a different approach from the bracelet, because we got a lot of responses from people like, I have multiple children. I would really like to be able to send them messages to all of them at the same time, for example. Or maybe there are groups of friends that want to reach out in new ways. So this is really the kind of starting point for us with Hey Touch. And different from the bracelet, where we have one really unique touch sensation, Hey Touch actually has over 200 different sensations. And this allows you really to create a whole breadth of communication. And this opens up communication to groups. So you can imagine you have this device, you're wearing it on your wrist, for example, and you feel this one really specific haptic sensation, and you know, like, this is my buddies going out for a drink. Or maybe, I need to pick up my child from daycare, for example. So it's really about creating this kind of group communication through touch. And it's also multi-wearable, so different from the bracelet, where you really only localize to the wrist. Hey Touch can actually be worn as either a necklace or a brooch, or you can just put it in your pocket, or maybe wear it as a keychain. Another thing that we're really trying to do with Hey Touch is establish it as a kind of social haptics platform. So we're working on creating an API that would allow other developers to add this layer of touch and touch communication to their existing applications. So what we have here with House of Haptics are two products. One that's really aimed at creating this intimate one-to-one connection between one person, between you and one person that you really care about. And on the other hand, we're trying to develop this kind of new language of touch that you could use apart from sending text messages or video chatting. So a new way to reach out to people. Now, of course, the world that we live in today is still very physical, right? We have physical objects and physical spaces. But what we're also seeing is that there is increasingly digital technology kind of encroaching on our physical space. I think Pokemon Go, for people who know this, is still quite a good example of this, right? Just the other day, I saw this group of people gathered on the corner of the street again. And when you're unsure what this is about, it looks a bit strange, but then you see them playing this game. And Pokemon Go is a really good example of a virtual world that kind of is an overlay of the physical world, right? So we see this kind of blending of something that only exists virtually, right? These Pokemon, that's tied to our physical world. Now, and there are other more sophisticated examples of this kinds of augmented reality technology that you see popping up. So this is an example actually made with Apple's AR kit. So this runs on a smartphone. And it creates this kind of illusion of a portal being there in a street in Paris, I believe it is. And using this kind of technology, you can actually step through this portal and enter a completely different but virtual world. And luckily, you can also step out again. Right, so even though physical space may have its limits, as you see here in this example of the street, we can use digital technology to kind of extend this physical space, at least visually, right? If you would put this kind of a portal up against the wall, well, walking through it would be quite painful, or at least trying to walk through it. So I think adding this kind of haptic feedback, discriminative touch feedback to these kinds of systems would really create a new level of extending these physical spaces, not just visually, but also tactily, through the sense of touch. I think this is also a great example. This is something called, or that Microsoft at least calls, holoportation. And what they're doing here, they created a system for Microsoft's HoloLens. And by taking recordings of these two people, they're in two different rooms, they can create an avatar of each person and transport this avatar to the other room. So it kind of creates the illusion that these two people are together in the same room, even though they might be miles apart. Now, where you see this gets a little bit awkward is when they try to do this high five, right? So again, I think we can use this kind of augmented reality technology to kind of extend not just our physical spaces, but also our social space. So the social interactions that we might have within these physical spaces. And I think, again, that this type of haptic technology, for example, the Hey bracelet, could be a really valuable addition to these kinds of experiences. Right? So seeing a person virtually in front of you, I think, is one thing. But also being able to reach out and shake their hand or give them a high five is quite another. Now, I think that these kinds of augmented reality technologies can have real impact on the way that people think about designing physical objects and physical spaces, and also the way that people engage with each other in these physical spaces. And I think that the addition of haptics, both in terms of discriminative haptics, so giving feedback about objects and physical spaces, as well as this aspect of social touch, right? So the way that we use our sense of touch for social communication, can have a real impact and change on the way that we think about designing spaces. Now, I don't really have the answers to how this might change, but I'm very happy to discuss this with you. So I was very pleased that Robert invited me to give this talk, and I'd also really like to share with you some more ideas when we move around the floor over here. As I said, you can try out our House of Haptics products in the back, so I invite you to do that, and for now, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Gijs Huisman.